Well, thank you for joining us again for another episode of Keep It Fictional Book Chat from the Port Moody Public Library. I am Virginia, your host today, and I am joined by my book friends Emma, Sadie, and Corinne. Now, as longtime listeners know, each week we read and talk about a book based on a weekly topic. Now, sometimes the topic works really good, well for some, and maybe not so much for others. But, I feel like after however many episodes we've done, it kind of balances out in the end. But I think it might be safe to say, but then again, maybe I just don't know my book friends as well as I thought, that I think today's topic works for no one. Simply because I don't think this is a genre that any of us read regularly. At least I have not never heard anybody talk about it on and off the show. And maybe that is also why, having done almost 200 episodes, we have yet to tackle this genre. We've done everything now. I feel like we've done romance, fantasy, mystery, thriller, science fiction, historical fantasy, and all kinds of like hybrids. But we have not done a Western yet until today. That's what we're doing today. We are going to be doing a book that is a Western. And Fiona, if you're listening, we are finally doing this. I remember you asking about it when we did I think the episode when we say, oh, like a genre that we don't usually read. I read a Western for that one. And you said like, oh, we should do one, on Western. And I feel like we all just pretended we didn't hear you. And just ignored it. But yeah, but we're doing it. We're doing it today. So a traditional Western is mostly set sort of post-Civil War, between the 1840s and the 1910s. And I think the most important thing probably for a Western is sort of that vibe, that feel of the Old West. It takes readers back in time into that place. It's a very nostalgic in many ways. Westerns are not particularly interested in historical accuracy, so it's not really historical fiction. And maybe that lends itself to like as they say, this timelessness, like that's not really well defined. I think the landscape is definitely like a character in itself. And as many people pointed out, there is actually lots and lots of description of the landscape in Westerns, that openness with a lot of possibilities, but also a quite hostile and harsh. So a lot of Westerns are about like sort of survival stories. Um, I think I mentioned before, my husband reads quite a variety of Westerns, and he has a substantial collection at home. And in addition to Train magazine, he also subscribed to Old West magazine, which I don't understand. But so I asked him like, just tell me about it because I know nothing about this, right? And he basically said to me, he's like, like when you really look at it, a lot of Westerns, have a lot of storylines that are very similar to any other kind of genre fiction. It's about survival, it's about adventure, going on a quest, living on the edge. You got this like hero, this idealized hero who's bringing justice to the town. A lot of times it's a coming of age story. It's also a story of loners, of kind of sometimes a bit morally, like, have like they're outlaws, but they still are like morally like kind of like they have that morals in them or whatever. And it's interesting, as he pointed out, a lot of what we associate with Westerns, or when we think about Westerns, especially the dialogue, like those like kind of howdy partner kind of dialogue, they don't exist in actual Western books. Like those are kind of more influenced by movies, Western movies that we are familiar with, that we kind of like imagine that's how they sound like. But like if you actually read a real Western, they don't exist. They don't talk like that. They just talk like regular people, like all of us. But I think this is a way to evoke that sense that, oh, we are now in the Western by using those kind of tropes and using those kind of dialogues. but no matter what it is, there's no two ways about it. Westerns are about colonization. It's about that expansion, about sort of so-called the taming of the wild and bringing order to the lands that are not inhabited, which of course is like definitely untrue and very, very problematic. Most of the Westerns, like are very, very much about the settlers, about their point of view, and very like in many cases very racist. Many racist depictions of indigenous people, like you never see black people in them. Like it's just they're like when they're not demonizing, like the people that they're stealing the land from. As my husband pointed out, like even if they're acknowledging that these people are just like they're defending their home, the characters are also like, but I want the land anyway, so I'm just gonna take it. So no, like it's a very problematic. I think it in some ways maybe contributes to it being not as widely read as maybe other genres, but I think not in books at least. But I feel like that is like in very much when we're more alive in other formats, in movies, in video games. If Gabriel were here, I'm sure like they will be talking about Red Dead Redemption. They will be talking about Borderlands, kind of a Western adjacent, in space kind of thing. So yeah, so I think that is a genre that there is room, to like reinvent it, to diversify it. I think like many other genres who have gone that route, and having like authors of color who is taking those stories, taking the motifs, taking those old west, and like trying to talk about perspectives that have not shown up yet in the genre. So, I think I'm hoping that, that is something that, like maybe some of us will look at it and be like, you know what, we can like do something about it. And then we can like show sort of other points of views, in these stories. So there are definitely some more contemporary take on the Western stories. I'm really curious to find out whether my book friends have gone with something a little bit more traditional or whether they have gone with something a little bit more contemporary. So we will find out. So we are going to start with Emma. Emma, what Western did you read for today?
So I, as you probably assumed, don't really read a lot of Westerns. I think I was turned off from them when I was an undergrad and was forced to read Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Very traditional Western, a lot of scalping of indigenous folks that happened in that book. I was not into it. I did not finish it. I pretended I read it for my English classes, but it just wasn't for me. And so I think that kind of turned me off of the like traditional Western genre because of what you said, Virginia, kind of the heavy focus on colonization and colonialism and the way that indigenous people and black people in any sort of POC are treated in them. So traditional Westerns haven't really been my thing. I think I've only read like one other traditional Western in my life, and it was The Best Bad Things, which I did for the Warrior Women episode. And that one was pretty good because it subverted the Western genre in that the protagonist was like a bisexual, gender bending gunslinger. Like she was cool. She was also very morally ambiguous, like you said, about Western protagonists. But it wasn't like a traditional Western. It had the Western vibe, but the storyline wasn't like the traditional Western from like the 1800s or whatever. So for this week, kind of predictably, I did not read a traditional Western book, but I do really like sci-fi. And I really like sci-fi westerns and space operas, as you know about me. Um, so like I'm a huge Cowboy Bebop fan. Kind of wish Gabriel was here because we could talk about the video game The Outer Worlds, which is super fun if you like space westerns. But so for today, I have a book that I was kind of drawn to because the plot of it reminded me of the game The Outer Worlds. It's about a stranger who crash lands on planet Earth. In The Outer Worlds, a stranger crash lands on any sort of planet. But they have to kind of fight their way through this galactic empire to get back to the ship that they crashed from. So the book I have this week is pretty similar plot-wise to that. It's a debut novel that takes place in the distant future, so definitely not a historical Western, where most of humanity has spread out to the reaches of the galaxy, leaving Earth very sparsely populated. So this book is Frontier by Grace Curtis. It's Curtis's debut novel. And it starts following a calamity that brought about by climate change. Earth has become a very hostile wasteland, and most of the human population has abandoned it to settle all across space in what's called the Central Galactic Empire. Those who chose to stay on Earth have now created a religion centered around worshiping Mother Earth as a god herself. They view the calamity as a result of human sin, as a punishment for not taking better care of the planet, and they consider the rest of humanity, those who chose to abandon Earth, sinners. And their technology that they then created in space is renounced and it's called heretical. So, in the Earth folks' eyes, in those people's eyes, this climate calamity that destroyed the planet was deserving. It was something that the human race brought upon themselves through their negligence, and they must suffer the consequences of it. So one day on planet Earth, a pair of scavengers living there they see a mysterious aircraft crash land onto the planet from the sky. They end up recruiting a local mechanic to drive them out to the crash site so they can scavenge the wreckage and claim their treasure from what crashed. At the site, however, the three wind up killing each other before they're even able to get the hatch of the craft open. They kind of metaphorically stab each other in the back so they can each claim the treasure for themselves. And characters like these three at the beginning are encountered all throughout the whole book. People on Earth are selfish, they're lawless people who will do whatever is in their power to survive in a wasteland, and who often end up dead because of it. So eventually, the hatch to the crash pod opens, and out pops a stranger from space, the first space visitor to the planet in 3 centuries. And she is immediately greeted by three fresh corpses outside of her escape pod. The stranger takes clothes and weapons from the corpses, and she slowly makes her way into the nearest town she can find, where she encounters a librarian, of all people, trying desperately to convince a self-righteous patron that no, he cannot keep the books that he's borrowed, and yes, he must pay for the ones that he's never returned. The patron, who turns out to be the sheriff in town, ends up leaving after seemingly winning the argument with the librarian, and the stranger decides to help the librarian get her books back. In return, she's hoping that she can ask this sheriff if she can use his communicator device to communicate with the spaceship that she crashed from. Um, and then, so in order to help the librarian get her books back, the librarian's library is in this van. So what they do is they end up driving the van, housing the library into the sheriff's home. They kidnap him. And with him in the back of the van, they swerve it so aggressively that the shelves of books collapse on top of him, knocking him unconscious. While he's unconscious, the librarian and the stranger take the stolen books back from his collection, and they leave his unconscious body on the side of the road. So this is the first chapter. In the next one, the stranger is now called the courier, and she's delivering a tortoise from one town down a long and dangerous stretch of desert highway to another town in order to deliver insulin to a young girl. Once again, she must face a lot of hostility of the wasteland and of its inhabitants who seem to always be trying to kill her as she's trying to make this delivery. The book continues like this from chapter to chapter, where in each chapter, the stranger encounters a different person living on Earth. And through the eyes of that person, we learn just a little bit more about who the stranger is through the people that she encounters on her journeys. So in each chapter, the stranger who hails from space also must learn little and little more about the tragedies that are suffered by those that are still stuck on Earth. And as she embarks on her journey, she must also keep her own identity safe, her own identity to herself as someone from space, as someone from the Empire. She has to keep it a secret, or it could mean her immediate death. Now, her first encounter, the one with the librarian and the sheriff, sets in motion a chain of events that sends the high deputy of the area on her trail to get rid of this space heathen, this person who's wreaking havoc all over his jurisdiction. And the chapters detailing the stranger's adventures alternate with interludes that are either research records from the Empire that reveal a little bit more about what happened to Earth during that climate calamity, or they are scenes from the High Deputy that show him closely following her trail. And usually he's murdering whatever character the stranger had just encountered, trying to get closer to her. Throughout her travels, the stranger is forced to navigate a world where she's not only considered an oddity and an other, but she's also viewed as a threat to those in power, like the High Sheriff. And she's an unpredictable wild card, a gunslinging woman with no loyalties, and a mission to fulfill of her own. Above all, in this world that's ridden of technology, her only true goal is she wants to get a communicator so she can broadcast a message to the woman that she loves, the woman that she lost on the ship when she crash landed down to Earth. So I thought this book was pretty good for a debut. It was pretty good. At times I felt like the writing was trying a little bit too hard to be really like lyrical and prosy. There were a few times where I had to reread a sentence a couple of times to really figure out what happened because it kind of jumbled through. And a lot of the action was kind of implied rather than explained, which seemed a little bit of an odd choice for a Western book. It seemed a little bit more of like a literary fiction sort of writing choice. But overall, I think the storytelling and the structuring of the book with those kind of alternating chapters and with the different chapters telling stories of the stranger through the eyes of other people were done pretty well. I enjoyed the way that the author weaved those different characters' narratives together and their perspectives together to kind of piece together that story of the stranger. And each of those individual accounts gives some fresh insight into who the stranger is, kind of seeing the stranger through the eyes of the people living on Earth. And I think the author did a good job of portraying different facets of human nature through those characters that are living on Earth. But if you're less of a fan of episodic storytelling, and you want books that are kind of more cohesively tied together, then you may not enjoy this one just because it doesn't feel as cohesive as a traditional novel might feel. There's not a ton of connection between the different stories and especially between the different like side characters that the stranger encounters along the way. So sometimes it felt like there was too much put on, like too much time and energy was put onto those characters, and then we just never see them again. But you do learn a little bit more about the stranger through those moments, so it kind of works out in the end. But I could see that people who prefer a more plot-driven story, less of a character-driven story, might get easily frustrated by that. It definitely reads more like a collection of short stories that are decently tied together than one cohesive novel. I did really enjoy the sci-fi Western setting. I liked like the Earth as a wasteland. It was very, like, if you're a video game fan, it was very Fallout, very The Outer Worlds. Um, I do wish we got to see more of the Empire since I love space opera. I love like Cowboy Bebop. I love these like space westerns that actually take place in space. So I do wish we got a bit more of that. But if you're into that like futuristic Earth wasteland type of setting, then you'll probably really enjoy this book. If you're a fan of video games, of sci-fi Western video games, then I think you'll really enjoy this. And like I said at the beginning, I was originally drawn to it because of my love for the Outer Worlds, and this book does have a lot of similarities to kind of the setting and the plot of that game. So that was really cool. Also, if you like shows like Firefly, this will totally be up your alley if you like those types of sci-fi Westerns. I will add that you do not learn a whole lot of detail about who the stranger is or her own backstory until the very, very end, or about that like lost love that she's looking for. I think it's around page 200 that you finally learn what her name is. So that could definitely be frustrating for some readers. But if you like a book with like some long sapphic pining where you really, really have to wait for that satisfaction, then this definitely works in that regard. And some of the moral tones can come off a little bit preachy at times, especially with there's a lot of religious zealotry kind of centering on that like Mother Earth religion that's created after the big climate change calamity. And some of the talks about climate change can be a little bit preachy as well. But overall, I thought Frontier was a really solid debut, and it would be great for readers who enjoy climate fiction, anyone who enjoys ecofeminism or sci-fi westerns, and don't mind a little bit of sapphic pining or preachy optimism about saving the world. So that was Frontier by Grace Curtis.
Thank you, Emma, for bringing us space western to the show today. I think that's one of the other things is the sort of those hybrids, western plus something else that has getting like quite popular. So thank you for bringing one of those. And it's interesting you mentioned Blood Meridian because that was originally my choice for today. And I started reading. I'm like, you know what? I don't really want to, but I do.
I hated that book. I hated it so much.
But you know what? I do like his writing. I find his writing very interesting. His style has an interesting style, but I just don't want to in terms of subject matter and just like how grim it is. I just don't want to. So yeah, but eventually maybe I will try another one. Maybe we'll see. Mm-hmm. All right. Miss Corrine, do we have like a Western? Do we have a hybrid Western? What have you got for us?
Well, when you think of Westerns, don't you think of cowboy romance? Maybe? Yeah, so I went the most literal direction in that it was late at night and I went on Libby and typed in cowboys. Which is generally like I don't get it. I really, really don't get it. And maybe it's just because like I grew up in Alberta and spent some time in like southern Alberta, and I'm like, mm-mm, mm-mm. Although I did go to like a truly amazing cowboy poetry festival, which was one of the most wonderful days of my life. Oh yeah, it's everything that you imagine it to be. And if like that was the vibe, then sure, I totally understand. But as a like a romantic genre, I do not get it, but that's okay. So I went with like a modern Western, or a like modern reinterpretation of the Western genre, because like in some ways people have argued that like Louis L'Amour or whatever like that is like the equivalent to like the romance genre, and that is in some way wish fulfillment, or that you're kind of like exploring a life that could have been, or like an ideal life that's very like gendered. Oh boy. All right. Have any of you seen the movie Overboard? The like original 1987 movie? Okay. So it's about Goldie Hawn in like her heyday. And she's like this spoiled heiress who lives on a yacht, as you do. And she and her like kind of scummy husband, they kind of toddle into one of these very small towns, and they want someone to, and I had to read the Wikipedia article because I watched this when I was a child, so I have very few memories of this bit. They ask him to renovate a closet for him, according to Wikipedia. Anyways, Kurt Russell is the widower. He's got 4 sons. His hair is fabulous as per usual. And he comes onto this boat and remodels their closet. And then because they're rich jerks, they refuse to pay him. And so he's all angry because he used good oak instead of cedar. Again, going off the Wikipedia article, weird detail. But anyways, he did a really good job and he wants to get paid because he's a widower. He's got 4 sons to take care of in this tiny little podunk town. But they kind of sent him packing because he's poor and they're rich. So Goldie is like, has an argument with her bad husband and falls over the edge of the water and loses her memory. She gets picked up by a garbage trawler and put into the psych ward of a hospital, where her husband kind of takes one look and is like, actually, this is super convenient for me, so she can just stay here. But Kurt Russell reads about her story in the newspaper and is like, aha, this is how I will get revenge. So he goes to the hospital and convinces Goldie Hawn that she is his wife, and then essentially kidnaps her to do labor at his house and take care of his 4 children. And he gaslights her into thinking that she is his wife, and essentially just has an indentured servant for a while, and then eventually romance ensues, I guess. So amnesia as a trope in romantic literature has a rich and storied history, and I think it sucks. I don't think it's great. I don't understand the only reason, the only way that I kind of see it is like if it's like on the angstier side of like, oh, we broke up 5 years ago and I still love you, but I'm afraid to say it, and I still think you're my husband except we're divorced. Like, okay, we're into that. Because amnesia is technically like a second chance romance. It's a no stakes second chance romance. Except one of those people has massive brain injury. And that's where I had a real problem with A Cowboy to Remember by Rebekah Weatherspoon. Just look at them abs, as far as they can see. Okay, so Evie Buchanan is a star chef. She's a reality television show. She was like the first Black chef to win some sort of cooking show, Chippity Chop. I don't know. I can't keep track of them. And she is kind of like a rising star. She has her own show. She's universally beloved. And she's at this kind of like industry Christmas party and she's having a good time. But Christmas always brings back bad memories for her of like how Nan Buchanan died and she hasn't been back to the farm in a long time. All these Christmas songs make her think I need to get rid of my Western accent. Okay, take it down. Make her think about like her old life back on the ranch. And then she gets pushed down the stairs. There's someone from the reality television show who lost out who just doesn't like her, so she just kind of like hucks her down the stairs. So she wakes up in a hospital with absolutely no memory of who she is. So we're talking like zero, doesn't remember her name, doesn't remember her phone number, doesn't remember her family, nothing. She is a blank slate. Into her room strolls Zach Pleasant and his brother Jess, and they're rodeo champions from the Pleasant Ranch in California. And they have come because Zach is her emergency contact, despite the fact that they have not talked or seen each other in 10 years. Yeah. So he has shown up because he drops everything. It's the middle of Christmas and he kind of abandons all that to come and take care of her. Her friends and assistant and makeup artist are also there. And they're like, you should you should take her. Just take her back to the ranch. Because she doesn't have any living family, but you know, I don't know, she's from your town and you were clearly friends at some point. So just take this woman. Just take her. Just take her. And so they do. They just do. So yeah, they take her back to the very, very small town and they take her back to the ranch, where his entire like extended family knows her and loves her and kind of concentrates on helping her kind of regain her cooking skills that she has lost and helps her kind of re-find herself, I guess. Okay. I will be perfectly honest with my book friends and our listening audience in that I did not finish this book. Because I actively do not want these people to get together. I don't want this. I don't think they should. I think it's a really bad idea. So she like has dreams, which I think are supposed to be like flashbacks of when they were like teenagers, and like she had this massive crush on him, and he was like, whatever. And then 10 years ago, like something really happened between them, and that after that, they never spoke again. Never, never, never. And he tells her this, and she has no follow-up questions. Like, hey, like, what happened 10 years ago that we never like, that we don't talk anymore at all, like not even Christmas or anything like that. She has no questions. He is attempting to woo someone with, again, a massive brain injury that does not remember anything about her life. And in the past 10 years, she has become this massively successful celebrity chef. And you live in this tiny town on your ranch. All of her friends are monsters because they're like, you should definitely have sex with him. And I'm like, oh no, you should not. He is essentially a stranger, and you are recovering from a massive brain injury. She has to relearn how to cook. She has to relearn she doesn't know who her family is. She looks at pictures and she's like, who are these people? Now is not the time for makeouts. Now is the time to heal. And yet, every time she looks at him, I guess she feels something, and he's like, "Oh, the spark is still there, and you're super hot, so let's make out." Yeah. So I disagreed. I don't think they should make out. There are some good parts about the book. Rebekah Weatherspoon is a really good author. I think this is just a trope that I do not love. The parts where she's relearning how to cook and kind of relearning cooking and kind of like inspired by Miss Leona, who is kind of like her mentor or like grandma figure, who was this Oscar-winning Black actress who kind of like broke through the ceiling for that. Like there are some really interesting characters and her kind of connecting with her culture through cooking and food. And especially the brother Jess, who asks a lot of questions and is like, Zach, she has a massive brain injury and you treated her very poorly. Maybe you shouldn't be making out with him. And they're like, meh, those are the people that I liked. The romance I did not. Um, yeah. So I initially kind of chose this book of all the kind of cowboy romance because I think that there is kind of this interesting recovering or like re-illuminating of history, especially of like Black cowboys and the history of that. So when you kind of pick up like, or if you've ever watched like a John Wayne movie, like it's as white as the I can see. And yet Black people have always been a part of that landscape. And in fact, like if we think about like modern day ranching, modern day cowboys, kind of like all the aesthetics of that culture. A lot of that is coming from Black culture itself. And so I really kind of enjoy, and that's what I think what romance novels kind of do really well is they kind of reclaim that history, reclaim those stories. But I think like I would have been perhaps better served by books that were checked out at the time that I was looking at 9 o'clock last night for a book, specifically like Compton Cowboys, Black Heroes of the Wild West. There's a fantastic children's picture book biography, Bad News for Outlaws, Bass Reeves, the first Black U.S. Marshal. If you're interested in kind of like exploring that, I believe Fiona also talked about one of the graphic novels for that. I think that that's a really interesting, that is, as Virginia kind of mentioned, that's a really interesting look at the Western experience and the Western aesthetics. And perhaps like if I had wanted the characters to get together, I could have explored a little bit more and maybe they kind of touch on that stuff. But I really think that they should give each other some distance and focus on healing for at least a year and then maybe have some discussions about like what happened 10 years ago in the power time and I was there and that their romance is never going to work because she lives in the big city and he's tied to the ranch and it's never, ever, ever going to work. Anyways, I'll give you an update next time as to whether I actually finished it or not.
All right. I feel like the theme for Corinne's books this year is kidnapping people who have lost their memory. Just happens like 2 weeks in a row, right? Okay. I think that's your theme. Memory loss and kidnapping. And also, just so that everyone knows, if you want to earn Corinne's respect, remember your follow-up questions. Ask questions. That's what Corinne appreciates. Also makes me think, is that actually what happens to Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn? Because they're together, right? Like,
not in the real world.
I know,
but
I'm just kind of thinking like. Anyway,
I don't know whether they fell in love on the set of that movie or whether they were already together. Like
yeah,
his hair is fabulous.
I want to know the timeline. Yeah. Also, I think they have a son that plays hockey in Richmond or something like that. They're actually local or something. Anyway, whatever. Okay, all right. Enough about Russell and Goldie Hawn. Let's get to our existential question. So this is kind of like a selfish question because it's been so darn hot these days. I feel like I'm just melting in the house and I feel like I'm just wasting my life away because I cannot do anything. I cannot get myself together and not even reading. So it makes me kind of think about like, would love to get some suggestions, I guess, from my book friends. And it's like, whether you're like just too hot and you can't read or if you're in sort of a reading slump, like how do you get out of it? What are your suggestions and advice? What works for you to get out of a reading slump if you have ever had one of those?
You go back to one of the authors that I love. There's like certain authors that will put out books kind of every year that I'm not always able to get to kind of in a normal reading time. And so I find that if I'm in a slump, then I'll go back to one of those and that will just kind of refresh me because it's familiar. I can usually get through them really quickly and it just kind of brings me back to a place where I'm excited about reading again. But I agree, Virginia, it is too hot to do anything. When I like after we put Evie down for the night, I literally just sit on the couch and stare at my phone while we have Jeopardy playing in the background for like an hour and a half. And then I go into my air conditioned bedroom and then I can read. Once the air conditioning is on, then I can read. But yeah, it's too hot to do anything.
You're not a reread though, right, Sadie? Because you don't reread, right? Yeah, okay. So you'll be reading like a new book or like, yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah, kind of like the series that I know that there's going to be a new one every single year, but I don't always kind of get to the new one. Then I'll keep those in a stash on the side for when I need something quick. I need something comforting. I need something to just kind of get me back into reading.
There you go. I do reread actually. So sometimes if my brain is like really shot, that I find is a good way to kind of get out of it because I don't have to pay as close attention because I already know the beats that they're going to hit and I'm just kind of looking for like the emotional journey of it. And so that's what I find kind of really useful. And then when I'm really like because yeah, after like the whole COVID lockdown, I've never kind of read as much as I did before that. Something that I do find really useful is nonfiction, actually. Choosing something that's on a topic that I'm interested in and maybe just kind of reading like a short chapter, because usually they're quite self-contained in that you don't have to read the entire work. You can kind of flip around to find a particular thing that you're interested in and then just read that. And I would argue if I wasn't wearing so much synthetic clothes, it would be the perfect temperature.
I'm like Corinne, I also will reread. So I'll either go back to something that's like tried and true, a book that I really, really love, or I'll read a manga, like something that's just kind of short and snippy and quick and fast paced. Like I've reread Haikyuu so many times. I've reread Yona so many times because it's like, oh, if I'm in such a funk that I can't get out of it, I at least know that these volleyball boys have my back. And so I can always kind of return to something that's really comforting. And I know not every book friend present in the room is like me, but when it's really hot out, I just go outside because anything outdoors is going to be cooler than inside of my stupid apartment. So I'll go outside and walk around Trout Lake and like feel a little bit of a breeze for a moment. Or if it's my day off, I'll go to the ocean and I'll just like submerge my body in the unforgiving Pacific and feel the cold for a little bit. But yeah, I understand that not everyone here is an outdoor cat like I am. So, but that's my solution when it gets unbearable inside.
Interesting. Yeah, because I was thinking about it. I think I'm like the opposite. Like when I'm in the reading slump, I go for something like that, something different, something new, something that I know will be weird, that it will just like kind of wake me up in some ways, that it will be like refreshing rather than like the same old. Like I need something different to get myself like out of that, to be like, oh, this is like so amazing. This is so weird. This is so different. Like, what is this? And that's how I get myself out of it. I find that that helps a little bit for me. So yeah, but when it's this hot, nothing helps. Nothing helps, I think. Anyway, and also like I'm like weird that I have to have a hot drink. So like I don't drink anything cold. So that despite how hot it is, I'm like drinking like this boiling hot coffee just because I need a hot drink. Same, yeah. Anyway, so that doesn't help because it just gets hotter and hotter. Uh,
Okay, but that is not what I have heard. So all of my students who are from like Iran are like, oh no, 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 no. You have to drink really hot drinks because then you sweat more and it cools you down. That is what they swear by. And like their temperatures are a lot more extreme than ours. So I'm inclined to believe.
I've heard the same thing that drinking something hot is good when it's really, really hot outside. It's something about like the heat being internal makes it feel cooler on the exterior or something. I don't know the science behind it, but that is what I've heard. I second what Corinne said.
have you actually tried it? Because it doesn't work.
I drink
Like,
hot coffee throughout the summer too, so but I also drink cold beverages.
yeah, because I'm like, it doesn't hurt. It just get me feeling more hot. And then I regret it. Like, did I put this hot beverage in me when I shouldn't? Anyway. All right. Well, thank you for those ideas to get people out of a reading slump or get somehow out of the heat or into the heat. I don't know. So yeah, so I'm going to go next. And I think in the second half of this episode, we have maybe a little bit more different kinds of westerns to offer you. When I got this like when I got the topic, I was immediately kind of going to go with a Weird West book, So Weird West, like a mashup between like either a horror western, fantasy western, or science fiction western, because I feel like, okay, well, that's comforting because I know that those was going to be anchored by some of my favorite genres, so I should be okay with those. I also read quite a few. When I first got into reading urban fantasy, of course, that kind of like led me to, when I was looking up books, led me to like sort of the Weird West stuff. And I think the first book that I read was probably The Blood Riders. I think it's a book by Michael somebody. And it was about like, like a kind of a marshal being hired to like go against some vampires that have been terrorizing the land kind of thing. So yeah, so that was kind of where my introduction to Western is, and I quite enjoy Weird West books. But I didn't pick one of those today because I feel like if I'm going to make all my book friends read a Western, I kind of should stick with a traditional Western and like just not take the easy way out. Also, when my husband finds out that like we're doing a Western episode, he was quite excited and he has like this stack of books to like, oh, you should try these. And I feel obligated to like read one of them. Because if there's any episode where I will actually take a suggestion, it's probably this one. So I feel like, okay, I guess I should read one of those. So I went with more of a classic, more kind of I would say it probably considered canon, of the genre, but not just in Western, but also kind of like considered to be like the great American novel kind of thing. Published in 1968. This is my first experience with this particular story, but I think most people will probably be familiar with this story through the two movie adaptations, and the recent one featuring Matt Damon, which I think is one of Sadie's favorite, maybe. I don't know. You talk about him being the reason why you watched the Bourne movie, so I don't know if that's a thing. But I've never seen any of the movies, so this is a completely new story to me. And this is the story of Maddie Ross of Yale County. Maddie Ross was 14 years old when her father, Frank Ross, was killed by a man named Tom Cheney, a drifter that her family has kindly taken and gave him a job. Her father and Cheney went to Fort Smith to buy some horses, and Cheney got into some like fight in a bar, and when her father tried to intervene, Cheney killed him. Not only that, he stole the $100 that was left after buying the horses, took Judy, her father's horse, and 2 gold coins that her father always carries with him. Rumor has it that Cheney is hiding out. He's thrown himself in with some outlaws led by a guy named Lucky Nat Pepper. Lucky Nat Pepper earned his name Lucky because bullets never seem to hit him. Now Cheney has joined his gang. Maddie is set on getting justice for her father, and she is going to find Cheney. She went first to Fort Smith to settle her father's affairs because her mother has to take care of the other kids. And that's all she's supposed to do there. She's just supposed to get those settled and go home right afterwards. But Maddie wants to find Cheney, wants to get revenge. So she decided she's going to stick around and try to find him and drag him back so that justice can be served. But Maddie is not stupid. Maddie is not reckless. She is well aware that she's only 14 and that she will need some help. So she asks around, trying to find who is the best marshal for this job. She wants to hire someone to help her out. And people have lots of suggestions. They describe all kinds of different, famous marshals that they think will fit the job. And they're like, they have different recommendations for her. And after listening to all the descriptions, she's like, so where can I find this Rooster guy? And they're like surprised why she would pick Rooster because he is kind of a little bit older. He's half drunk most of the time. He's also very trigger happy. It's not really the person you want, not a reliable person like some of the other marshals. But Maddie thinks that he is exactly the person that she needs. Someone who is tough, someone who is willing to bend the law a little bit, someone who is not interested in just being nice and, like going by what the law says, like someone that might have a little bit of a reputation for violence. And that might just be the guy that she needs. So she go and find Rooster and offer him $100. Of course, not all at once. You're gonna get some now and then all of it when the job is done. And after they agree on the price, Maddie was like, okay, so when do we leave? And Rooster was like, wait, what do you mean we? You're not going. I'm not gonna I'm gonna find the guy for you. You're gonna stay right here. And Maddie is like, no. I'm not gonna give you money and let you out of my sight. I'm gonna make sure things get done and I'm going to see to it. So yeah, no, you're bringing me along. And Rooster, was like, you're a child. Do you know what you're getting into? But do you think there's anything that could dissuade Maddie from tagging along? No. And this is not going to be the first time that Rooster tries to ditch Maddie, but he can try all he wants. Maddie is not going anywhere. This is, as some of you probably who have seen the movies will know, this is True Grit by Charles Portis. As mentioned, movies by John Wayne, of course, and then later on, the more recent remake by the Coen brothers. True Grit, I think, is considered a Western, but also kind of considered a bit more literary. I think according to someone who knows Western in my house, it's unique in the way that because it's a very personal story, unlike many others who are often the stories are also a little bit bigger, a little bit broader in scale. They're always about fighting for the land or trying to somebody has stole the ranch or whatever. This is a very, very personal story. It's about one character who is trying to avenge a wrong done to her family, and that is not that is quite rare. It's also written in first person. So again, another thing that doesn't happen very often in Western. In this case, we have Maddie who is kind of telling the story 50 years later when she's now like an older person, and she's kind of talking about the things that happened when she was 14. And so again, quite rare. What I think makes the book different and interesting to me is that Maddie is a very, very different kind of heroine, and it's very refreshing because unlike many novels when you have female protagonists, very often they're sassy, they're sarcastic, and they're very often very reckless. They just do whatever they want. But that's not Maddie at all. Maddie is she's interested in getting the job done, which is, finding her father's killer, and she's determined to do it no matter what. But she's not interested in the adventure. You can tell that she has no interest in becoming a gun-toting sheriff or outlaw or whatever. Right? That's not what she wants. And often when you're in a story, a character might start off this way, reluctantly, they go on to this adventure, and then as the story progresses, it changes them. Did this adventure change Maddie? No, not at all. 50 years later, she's still this religious church goer that has absolutely no interest in this. This is just a thing that happened in the past. She got it done. She find Cheney, and that's all. That's it. She's not interested in anything else, which I find quite interesting as a character. And as she was telling the story, you can tell, there's definitely a lot of actions in it. There's shootings, there's gunfights, but everything is told in such a matter of fact way. Like she's not interested, she's not excited. There's no romanticizing any of these tropes. It's just things that just happen. It has to happen because she needs to find her father's killer. That's all it is. And so there's a lot of lines that she say that are just she's for example, eventually they were joined not just by Rooster, but also by this other Texas Ranger, LaBeef. That's the Matt Damon character in the movie. And LaBeef has spent 4 months tracking Cheney down for a different crime, right? And so reluctantly they join forces because they realize that, okay, well, maybe they can help each other out, even though they don't like each other, especially Rooster and LaBeef. And they always try to find a ways to ditch Maddie because again, she's a kid, they don't really want her around. But there's so many points when the two of them are discussing things, or they're arguing about what to do next, or they're trying to put all these lumps of cornbread and they're throwing it out and to see who can be a better shot. There's pages and pages of these dialogue and actions that where Maddie, Maddie is there, but she has no line, she's not there because you just think this is so stupid. This is what are you people doing? She's absolutely no interest in it at all. So you can just tell, without saying anything, you can just see her disdain of all this stuff that these two guys are doing. When asked do you want a drink? And she's like, no, why would I put a thief in my mouth to steal my brains? That's how she thinks. So she's really quite an interesting character that just knows what she wants and she's gonna get it, and that's all. And in the beginning, when she was trying to settle her father's affairs, and she was dealing with the guy who sold her father the horses, and she wanted to sell them back because she doesn't need them anymore, and all of that. And she just keeps saying well, but I have this lawyer, I have this lawyer who who is going to come and get you. So are you sure you don't want to pay me now? Because I'm gonna get this lawyer to go after you. So it's just such a weird thing to see, I guess, and throughout the thing, she's all about getting those papers signed, and then making sure so that you have a record of what the other people promises. So a very, very different kind of like protagonist than I think what we imagine a Western to be, like very action, even though there's action driven, but it's a very different in that way. And my copy, and I think this was released when the second movie came out, and it has an afterword by Tonna Tartt, author, of course, of The Secret History and also The Goldfinch. And apparently her whole family, generations of her family, love this book, and they just pass it on from from the great great grandmother to her, and get her to read it and they just love it so much. Do I understand the love for this book? I don't know whether I do or not. Just like people just love it, and I don't know if I get it or not. But I do have to say that it was an interesting read, again because of Maddie mostly, and it's like she's not it's not overtly like saying that like all these things are silly, but like you can just tell, you can just feel her thinking like, oh, these men around me, like what are they doing? Just go and get the guy, and that's all she cares about. So yeah, so quite an interesting read. So yeah, so if you're looking for a Western that might be like, I think, a good introduction to the genre, something very short, like it's a very easy read. Like it was like the texts are very straightforward. The prose, everything just kind of goes along. So, and it's fairly short, like about under 250 pages. But yeah, like quite a fast read, I think. And if you want to see kind of like, but also read like kind of consider one of should be one of the classics in the genre, I think you might. Again, you can check out like True Grit by Charles Portis. All right. Okay, we're gonna go to our next book, which I was asking Sadie. I'm like, because I was gonna say, oh, if Sadie has like another hybrid, then maybe we will do Sadie first, and I'll end one with the Western. But Sadie said that she also has one that is a little bit more traditional. So what is your book, Sadie?
All right. And I realize so my book is a gold rush story. So I think of it as more Western adjacent than kind of traditionally Western. And it does have a very hint of fantasy. And I realized that after I said that, Virginia, but it's not, I forgot because it doesn't come into the book all that much. And hearing you talk about what an actual traditional Western is, this one definitely has a lot of those themes in it. It is set during that time, it's set in 1949, so it's set during the time period. It's more of a historical one. I would say that it does follow, I think, a bit more actual historical accuracy than maybe some other Westerns do. But again, I don't know a ton about the Gold Rush, so maybe it also does not. I will have to look into it. And they do ride a lot of horses, which I feel like has to count for something in a Western. So this is Walk on Earth, a Stranger by Rae Carson, and is billed as a young adult fantasy historical fiction, but also Western. So it's set in 1849 in Georgia, and it's in the middle of the gold rush craze. Leah, or Lee as she's most commonly known, is out hunting for food for her family. She spies a deer and fires her gun. But the deer is spooked by something else a split second before her shot goes off and runs, meaning that she does hit it, but she only clips it. But her family really needs the meat. Her dad is sick. Her mom's not able to go out and hunt. And so this is up to her. She reloads and shoots again, this time bringing the deer down. However, it's not the deer that has her attention now. It's the buzzing in her head, in her entire body. The buzzing that tells her that gold is close by. Her mother calls this her witchy powers, and no one really knows where it came from. But Lee has always been able to sense gold, which, as you can imagine, is rather useful in a town that once had quite a lot of it. However, if anyone were to find out what Lee could do, she would never, ever be safe. And so only her and her parents know about her talent. She hasn't even told her very best friend, Jefferson. So one day, as Lee is coming home from school, she hears 2 gunshots coming from the direction of her own house. She keeps riding her horse Peony, only thinking that someone is probably out hunting. She silently wishes them luck. However, when she comes into the clearing in front of her house to see an abandoned man's boot, she starts to get worried. When she realizes that it's her father's boot, she starts to run. She finds her father's body lying across the steps of their house with a bullet hole in his forehead. Shocked and devastated, she starts to look for her mother, vaguely remembering that she did hear 2 shots. She finds her mother leaning against the barn, a shot in her stomach, but still able to warn Lee to run. However, Lee doesn't run. Not really, not in the way that her mother meant. In a daze, she does run to Jefferson's house to get help, but this is her home. And despite her parents not being there, it's still her home. Even after she realizes that not only were her parents murdered, but someone also stole the huge bag of gold dust that they had been hiding under the floor. So she stays. She takes the condolences and food from neighbors numbly, just trying to get through the next day and the next. When Jefferson shows up at her door the morning of her parents' funeral to tell her that he's decided to go to California with the masses of other people to find the gold that everyone is talking about, she doesn't know what to do. She knows that Jeff's father is drunk and mean, and Jeff has often commented on how he'd rather go find his mother's Cherokee family and see if maybe he could find a place with them than stay there with his father. But Leah never thought he'd actually leave. And on the morning of her parents' funeral, even after he asks her to come with him as a wife or even a sister, whatever she wants, she doesn't really have anything keeping her here anymore. But she knows that she still can't walk away from the only home she's ever known. So instead, she watches Jefferson walk away. She gets through the funeral, which the Reverend turns into more of a sermon than a eulogy, and once again numbly accepts the condolences from neighbors, even the more real and heartfelt ones, like from her father's friend Jim, one of the richest free Black men in Georgia. They'd still seem hollow to her ears. And then her uncle Hiram shows up. Hiram is her brother's younger brother. He's a lawyer who lives hours away in one of the bigger cities, and she doesn't really know him. However, when he approaches her at the funeral and draws her into a hug, calling her Sweet Pea, which sounds weird coming from his mouth, not her father's, her gold sense starts to explode. Hiram is covered in gold dust. Gold dust just like what was stolen from her own house. Now, Hiram wouldn't kill his own brother, would he? Leah honestly isn't sure. She doesn't know him. But when Hiram suggests later that night that he may also be aware of Lee's special abilities to do with gold, she knows without a doubt that he did kill her parents. And he did it to get to her. Now Lee runs. Now she runs and she doesn't look back. She hacks off her hair and dresses in boys' clothing, calling herself Lee McCauley, which is Jefferson's last name, to hide her connection to her family and praying that no one will realize she's a girl. She sells 2 of her parents' horses and cart to pay for at least part of her way. She's planning on following Jefferson to California. He said that he'd wait for her in Independence, Missouri, in case she changed her mind. And Lee is determined to make it to him before he leaves. They can go to California together, and with her magical gold sense, they will be rich. That is, if her uncle doesn't find her first. However, the road is not safe. Even as someone who can use a gun quite well, Lee knows that she's at a disadvantage, even disguised as a boy. And she soon finds herself robbed and almost killed. But she is strong-willed and she is determined, and she manages to talk her way into a job on the crew of a flatboat, carrying a well-off family down the river on their way to California. The work isn't easy, but Lee manages okay, and finally, exhausted, makes it to Independence. However, Jefferson is nowhere to be found, leaving Lee on her own once again and trying to figure out what to do next. So as I said, this is definitely more Western adjacent, but it does have kind of the feeling and the nostalgia of that time period and of the genre, I think. Its main focus is the gold rush story, and it definitely calls to mind a fun computer game from the 1970s that I used to play quite a bit, where you would more often than not die of dysentery before ever reaching Oregon. But that didn't stop us from trying. Always assign one of your characters to be a doctor. That is the only way that you are going to make it through the Oregon Trail. It even includes a bison hunt in the book, which I was quite good at in the game. I always was able to shoot those bison. Yeah. As I said, the fantasy elements of the book seem a bit unnecessary, and I think that's why, like, it doesn't really read as a fantasy. I think that her gold sense, it helps her out a few times, and it's kind of, I guess, the reason that her parents were killed, so it kind of starts the adventure, but it doesn't play a very strong role in the story. The story is more focused on kind of her journey to California, and the second half of the book kind of follows the caravan that's actually traveling from Independence to California, and yeah, kind of tells that more traditional gold rush Oregon Trail type of story. And the gold sense is there, but it's not really there. But the book also does not advertise itself as a high fantasy where magic would be more of the focus. So that might just be my preference for wanting a more magic forward story, and knowing that it was kind of billed as a fantasy, that I was a little disappointed. But yeah, so it doesn't promise a lot of magic. So I think that it delivers on what it's promised, but just I prefer something that would be a bit more fantasy esque. But that aside, I think that the story was definitely engaging. It is one of those kinds of stories where once you're halfway through the book, you just really hope that like something will work out for her, because nothing has worked out for her so far. Like, you just want one thing to go right for her, because it's really bad. But I think that her character and like her determination to succeed, and like she is so determined to get to Independence, she is so determined to get to California, that kind of carries it through the more discouraging parts of the story. I really liked the character of Jefferson as well. He's really, really loyal to Lee, which I appreciate, and I love kind of seeing their friendship and their trust. The book, I think, does kind of, touching on what you were saying, Virginia, like it does a good job of being realistic to the time period, which is not always a positive image. But I think that it also uses that to make a comment on the horrible treatment that was done in that time period. And so it does kind of focus around how the Native Americans are seen, and how that is not an actually accurate depiction of that group of people. Jefferson, as a half Cherokee character, I think is able to provide that representation in a much more positive way, and they're able to kind of touch on that and show the negative sides, but also kind of comment on that, and not just say this is reality and this is what's true. They also do have some Black characters in the story, obviously not as many as it would be nice to have. And they show representation of kind of enslaved Black people as well as free Black people. And so I think that the author is trying to make kind of positive, comments on it. I don't know if she's entirely successful, but I think that she's definitely trying. It also quite strongly comments on the role that women had in the era, and showing how much more freedom and autonomy Lee has once she has disguised herself as a man, versus the rest of the women who are kind of on this caravan train with her, who are dressed as women and living as women, kind of what they're losing and what she's gaining in that. I think that the story is definitely filled with both like wonderful and supportive characters and friends for Lee, and also some very truly awful characters who you really hope that Lee and her friends will be able to outsmart. The action in the book starts early, and apart from kind of a brief lull before Lee decides to leave her parents' house, it's pretty much nonstop action the whole way, which is kind of nice if you're looking for something a bit more adventurous, a bit more action filled. This is the first book of a series, which is good, because I do think that the ending came very abruptly, and I think that's because the author's planning on continuing the story in the next book. So yeah, I'd say if you're looking for something that is Western-y, or if you'd like to read about the gold rush craze or the kind of that time period, I know a little bit about the gold rush just because I grew up in a gold rush town. Nelson was a gold rush town in the late 1800s, so I know a little bit about kind of that time period. But if you are interested in that a little bit more, or if you just like a good adventure story that has a strong female protagonist, then I would definitely recommend Walk on Earth a Stranger by Rae Carson.
Oh, thank you, Sadie. I feel like Gold Rush stories definitely count as part of sort of that time period, I think. Yeah. So both and YA. So thank you for bringing a YA book as usual to the to the podcast. There's quite a few, I think, in the YA genre. Like like when I was looking things up, there was actually quite a lot of those. So yeah, so that was interesting. All right. Well, now that we have done Western, what should we do next? What are some horrible, like not horrible, I didn't say that. What is What are some other genres that we don't usually read that we can read for next time? What else? What else have we got?
Have we done like chick lit before?
You can do that next week when I'm not around, whenever that week is. Don't you have like a free? We did romance already. Come on, it's hard. And you're gonna do another one, so
Different
you could.
genre.
Yeah, but you're gonna have another opportunity because you're doing when I'm not around that week. You can do whatever you want.
What am I doing? What's the topic?
I think Sadie was going to do another romance one, so you can
Another
just
romance
make it
one,
like
but we could change it to chick lit if you
yeah,
want.
narrow
Brie.
it down to
Yeah,
chicklet.
yeah.
Yes,
Good, I'm
please.
good. No, just follow your heart. Follow your heart, Sadie.
What even is chicklet? How would you define chicklet?
It's sexist literary fiction. Or sorry, sexist definition of what literary fiction is, written by women. I don't even think it's a genre anymore because someone kind of looked at it and was like, wait a minute, these are just books written by women. And that kind of felt.
Well, I don't know what else. I'm sure there's like a lot, especially subgenres. There's probably a lot that we can tackle, right?
Have we done space operas yet?
I feel like maybe not. Maybe? Or did we do it for like, because I think way, way, way back at one of our first summer reading club, um, like our Monopoly summer reading club thing. I feel like that was maybe. I don't know. Maybe. I feel
Let's
like
do
maybe.
it. I could do a space opera. Do
I
an
enjoy
opera in
space
space.
opera.
That's not a challenge now, is it?
Oh,
Assassin fiction.
Oh yes, yes, Sadie. Oh yeah, we never do any of those.
animal stories.
Oh
I don't think that we've
yeah.
done like an
Oh no,
animal
we did.
centric.
We
Did
did.
we?
We did do it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Because I remember doing Hollow Kingdom with the crows. I did. We did do an animal one.
Have we done time travel?
I don't think we have. And like it's been so long since I've had a rant about the time traveler's wife that like
It's about time.
we
Bring it back.
it's about time.
Okay, all right, okay. Well, give listeners, if you have any other like random subgenres or genres that you think that we should challenge ourselves or you would like us to challenge ourselves to, please let us know. We'd be happy to do it. Yes, Corinne?
Have we done spy fiction? I was just thinking of like we did the James Patterson challenge. Have we done like the Lee Child challenge?
No, I don't think we have. Oh, we did. Did we do Spy?
I know you talked about, is it Spy Family? But I don't
Yes.
know if that was for a spy episode or just.
I don't remember what I was
That's
using
not a
Spy Family
challenge.
for.
That's not a challenge.
Mean.
Like, pay me to talk about Spy Family and I'll do it.
Well, we'll look at our I'll trust the spreadsheets and see what other topics we can do. Yes. Yeah, but anyway, well, I hope that like whether you are a fan of Western or not, hopefully out of the 4 books that we talk about today, there might be one that interests you. And you can give this genre a try, or just go watch Cowboy Bebop. That is also an option. Or play Fallout or Red Dead or whatever. So yeah, I'll play Red Dead. Yeah. So there are many options out there if you would like to get into this genre. So yeah, Corinne, did you have something to say?
I just assumed that you're going to end off today's podcast with a rousing rendition of Happy Trails to You.
You could do it. You're welcome to.
I'm not hosting today. I don't have to do a singing send off.
Yeah, and I'm hosting today, so I don't want to do that. So I don't have to.
Sadie, help us out.
As I say, as the resident singer, I'm happy to take it away. Happy trails to you until we meet again.
Nice. I was doing Foley work, but I didn't want to interrupt you. That's the horse. That's the horse.
All right. Well, thank you everyone again for indulging in this. We will find something else to challenge ourselves with next week. So until then, happy reading. We'll see you next time. Bye.